I wanted to make a short video to talk about a weird detail I noticed in my last read of A Dance with Dragons that could tell us a lot about how one of the battles of the Winds of Winter is going to play out. Just to recap, the latter part of the last A Song of Ice and Fire book, A Dance with Dragons, is mainly spent laying the groundwork for 4 battles which are about to take place more or less simultaneously at 4 different locations all across the world when the book ends, now to actually take place in the Winds of Winter. These battles have been much speculated on by fans and in the process have gained the following unofficial titles: the Battle of Blood for Euron Greyjoy's assault on Oldtown, the Battle of Steel for Jon Connington's attempt to take Storm's End, the Battle of Ice for King Stannis' confrontation with the Bolton-led forces holding Winterfell, and the Battle of Fire for the confrontation between the Slavers and Daenerys' loyalists holding Meereen. And there's one detail about this last battle that I had previously never given much thought to at all, but actually the more I think about, find increasingly interesting. After the incident at the Dragon Pit in which Daenerys is carried off by Drogon, we see Sir Barristan Selmy take control of the government in her absence and attempt to strike a balance between preserving an ever more fragile peace with the slavers encamped outside the walls and preparing for war should that peace break down. When Sir Barristan is discussing those preparations with his Council of War, he says this: "We have built a beacon atop the pyramid where once the harpy stood, dry wood soaked with oil, covered to keep the rain off. Should the hour come, and I pray that it does not, we will light that beacon. The flames will be your signal to pour out of our gates and attack." This seems like an entirely practical detail for their preparations, and if you're like me, you probably haven't paid much mind to it before. However, if we now look at the Battle of Ice that's about to take place in the north, we see something very interesting. Stannis' forces are snowbound in a small crofters' village on the way to Winterfell, anticipating an attack from the Bolton-led forces based there. There's one very prominent feature in that crofters' village. Here's Asha Greyjoy's description of the camp there upon waking after a snowstorm. The lakes had vanished and the woods as well. She could see the shapes of other tents and lean-tos and the fuzzy orange glow of the beacon fire burning atop the watchtower. Later, as the situation worsens, King Stannis retreats to this watchtower permanently. From time to time, his grace was glimpsed upon the tower roof, outlined against the beacon fire that burned there night and day, talking to the red gods, some said, calling out for Lady Melisandre, insisted others. Thirdly, the Battle of Blood in the west is anticipated to take place in the waters of Oldtown, a city which has, again, an extremely prominent feature. Here's the description from Novice Pate in the A Feast for Crows prologue. "The distant beacon of the Hightower floated in the damp of night like a hazy orange moon." I think you get the idea. There have been scant mentions of beacons and beacon towers in A Song of Ice and Fire so far. Now suddenly 3 out of 4 of the most anticipated battles of the whole series are taking place within sight of one. I can't really say what this image of the tower with the beacon on top represents, either symbolically or in the sense of the magical realm and universe. However, I don't believe this symmetry can be a coincidence. Now that raises a question. We have 3 beacons and we have 4 battles, so where is the 4th beacon? If we look at the last of the 4, the Battle of Steel, Jon Connington's attempt to take Storm's End, I think we can see an obvious answer. Again, Storm's End has one very prominent feature: a single massive tower rising high above the castle like a huge spiked fist, visible from afar. I believe that a fire or beacon atop this tower will play some important role in the Battle of Steel, either in taking the castle or in holding it for the Golden Company and the Aegon cause. We already know that Connington is planning to take the castle by guile. If we then incorporate a beacon fire on top of the tower as having a role in that plan, we can narrow down the possibilities significantly. I think there are 2 scenarios. Firstly is the Nightfire scenario. These are Stannis' men that are holding Storm's End right now, and at least some portion of them are likely to be worshippers of R'hllor. Whether Nightfires are being held at Storm's End, and if so, where, hasn't been confirmed by the text. However, if they are being held, the top of the tower would be as good a place as any. It's prominent, it sends a visible message to the enemies outside the walls, and for the corresponding morning ceremony welcoming the sun that R'hllor worshippers also sometimes seem to hold, there would be no better place to see the sunrise in the whole castle. And in support of this, as previously mentioned, we see Stannis worshipping R'hllor on the top of the tower in the Crofters village, so having your Nightfire up on top of a tower is at least somewhat orthodox practice. Having a portion of your garrison away from duty and distracted at a regular time each day would represent a serious vulnerability for a castle that's already in demand, just 200 or 300 men in the garrison, and the Golden Company could exploit that. In this scenario, Connington has presumably learnt of this practice either from locals or his own scouts observing the fire being lit on the tower at regular intervals, and can then time his attack around that to catch the guards unaware and away from the walls. Some portion would be distracted by the religious rites and too far away from the outer walls to fight off attackers, and the rest would have their night vision reduced by the massive fire behind them. In a mirror image of that quote about Meereen, the beacon flames would be the Golden Company's signal to pour towards the walls and attack. There's something quite pleasing about the idea of the uncreative Mace Tyrell and his massive force sitting down for a long conventional siege and missing this obvious vulnerability precisely because it's mundane and it happens right in front of them every night. Whereas John Connington doesn't have the time, he doesn't have the manpower, he has to be creative, and so he's able to rapidly identify and exploit the weakness. The other possibility I would call the signal fire or lighthouse scenario. In this scenario, the beacon on the tower is being used as a form of communication by the garrison that the Golden Company would then be able to dupe to make the garrison think their forces were friendly until they were already inside the walls. The idea is that Stannis has arranged some kind of recognition signal for the commanders in Storm's End that involves a beacon on top of the tower, which the Golden Company then learn about and duplicate while approaching either by land or by sea. For instance, we know that Salladhor Saan is in the region, literally a stone's throw away, and he's certainly mercenary enough to turncoat on Stannis for a reward from the Golden Company, either by providing them inspiration about the signals used at Storm's End or by ferrying in the men himself. Then, seeing Salladhor Saan's ships, the garrison in Storm's End would light a beacon on the tower to guide him into the small port. In fact, this may be the exact purpose of that one huge tower at Storm's End, an early example of a lighthouse like the Hightower in the west, to warn ships of the danger in Shipbreaker Bay. Once inside the tunnel, the Golden Company could take Storm's End from within entirely with the element of surprise. Either of these scenarios seems plausible to me, and if they are anything like what we see play out, it will be part of a motif that's mirrored across all 4 battles. We should then return to the question of why this image is appearing in these multiple events like this. This repeated motif feels too neat to be a coincidence, especially in a world where prophecies and magic exist. A beacon is kind of a two-sided symbol. It represents both hope, but also a warning of danger. And I can see it in both of these roles in the different instances the motif appears in the Winds of Winter. I think just like how many different characters in the world in some ways share characteristics with and embody this universal mythological figure of the last hero or Azor Ahai, these 4 battles all happening at the same time would be in some way prefiguring the final apocalyptic battle yet to come. So what we're seeing play out is an echo of what happened once in the ancient past and what is bound to happen again as the cycle comes to a close. Perhaps it's the case that a battle of the beacon is some necessary eschatological step for end times prophecy, and all 4 of these battles are attempts to instantiate that by unseen forces, either human or otherwise. I don't see any potential reference to this beacon tower motif in the prophecies we've seen so far. Perhaps someone will correct me on that, but what we do know is if there really are attempts being made to bring about this last days type of scenario, whoever is behind them will be working at least partially to a script we can't see yet. Otherwise, we'd know the whole story already. We have had hints at attempts to force prophecy before in Westeros, Summerhall, Rhaegar, even Daenerys and the stallion who mounts the world. And similarly, attempts to instantiate prophecy went hand in hand with power in medieval Europe. We can think of the legend of the last Roman emperor, an eschatological figure whose reign and prophesied abdication in Jerusalem were supposed to be the last events before the advent of the Antichrist. This figure was a subject of fascination for both Holy Roman and Byzantine emperors, who took various steps to embody this character and thus mark their own reigns as preceding the end times. Similarly, if this battle under the Beacon Tower is part of the end time prophecy for Westeros, then the multiple times we're seeing it appear are multiple attempts to bring this prophecy about. One of the really central themes of A Song of Ice and Fire is the power of stories, the power historical narratives and mythology have to shape how people view themselves, how they relate to the world around them, how they interpret events, and consequently, how they act and the decisions they make. And so I really like this idea that in this world, prophecy is not just concrete knowledge of future events, but more like a set of motifs or a story that these various unseen forces are all attempting to bring to life and make real in Westeros, rather like putting on a show. That concludes everything I have to say on this subject. I hope that even if you're unconvinced by my speculation about it, I've been able to draw your attention to this pattern that we're seeing, which will perhaps allow you to come to your own conclusions.